Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're taking the stack of sources you've shared, and we're really going to rip the cover off the three biggest forces, the most fundamental forces,
Yeah.
defining the future of artificial intelligence right now.
Yeah, this really is a pivot point.
It is. This is that moment where the tech is moving beyond, the experimental phase. It's transforming into this complex, indispensable, and now regulated enterprise infrastructure.
That's absolutely right. And our mission today is to give you a shortcut to being, well, truly informed about what we're calling the AI Trilemma. We're going to unpack how three massive shifts are interlocking.
Okay, what are they?
First, the new high-fidelity architecture that's replacing the basic AI models, what we call Agentic RAG.
Right.
Second, the massive legal and data governance liabilities that are being set in courtrooms as we speak.
And the third?
And finally, we have to look at this fundamental contradiction in economic policy, specifically how U.S. fiscal policy is, well, it's structurally set up to favor machines and automation over retraining the human workforce.
So if you're trying to build or regulate or just get your head around what the next 5 years of AI look like, these three things, tech, law, and economics, they're basically the map.
That's the map.
Okay, so let's start with the technology itself. We've all played around with the basic LLMs. But what defines this next generation of enterprise AI? How does it get past those black box limitations of the early models?
Well, the problem with the early, the pure large language models was that their knowledge was just a snapshot in time.
Static.
Totally static. It was constrained by its training data. So if you asked about something that happened yesterday, it just couldn't help you. Now, traditional RAG retrieval augmented generation, that was the first fix.
And how did that work?
It set up a pretty rigid pipeline. Find some documents from a database and then, generate a response based on them. But as business queries got more complex, that rigid pipeline it fell short. It would often get stuck if the first search wasn't perfect.
And that's where the agentic component comes in, the A in ARAG. That's what transforms the game, right? It introduces intelligence into the process itself.
Exactly. Agentic RAG is the true state-of-the-art for applied enterprise AI right now. That Agentic A is an intelligent orchestration layer.
Yeah.
It stops treating the process like a fixed pipeline.
Like a conveyor belt.
Yes, exactly. And it starts treating it like a continuous, coordinated reasoning system. It makes decisions, it plans its steps, and it actively adapts its retrieval strategies mid-query, much like a human researcher would.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Walk us through that new pattern. If I give it a complex prompt, something like draft a summary of all third-party risk assessments from Q3, but only for vendors flagged in the legal database. How does it handle that?
Right, so it kicks off this really sophisticated reasoning cycle. Step one is the Agentic A layer. It interprets your goal, not just the keywords, but the intent.
What you actually mean.
What you actually mean. And it plans a multi-step workflow. It decides, okay, I need to go here first, then check this other source, then synthesize.
And then comes the retrieval.
Then comes step two, the dynamic retrieval one.
Well,
And this part is key. It's not a one-shot search anymore. The agent can do what's called multi-hop retrieval, meaning the result of the first search actually informs a second rewritten query. And it can span across multiple enterprise sources at the same time. It can go from a vector store, say for document context, over to a structured database for those compliance flags you mentioned.
So it's not just pulling a stack of relevant documents.
Yeah.
It's actively seeking and cross-referencing specific pieces of evidence.
Precisely. And this leads right into step three, which is the second augmentation, A. This is the crucial differentiator for reliability.
How so?
Instead of just dumping all that raw, messy data it found straight to the LLM, the agentic system acts as a filter. An organizer. It cleans, summarizes, restructures, and validates the information into a highly curated context package.
It's basically optimizing the evidence before generation.
It is. It's preparing the ground for reasoning. And that means the final generation, G, the output from the LLM, is based on verified, context-optimized inputs. So the chances of hallucination just plummet.
That makes sense. It's grounded in a traceable process.
That's correct. Because of this structured, multi-step process, Agentic RAG gives you high auditability, traceability, and consistency. You can trace every single claim the AI makes right back to the exact source document it used.
And you can see the reasoning steps the agent took to get there.
You can. And this is just invaluable in complex, high-risk fields like regulatory compliance, financial services, healthcare. Anywhere, accuracy and grounded facts are absolutely non-negotiable. It truly turns the LLM into an intelligent, auditable collaborator.
The technological leap toward reliability it's huge for enterprises. But let's shift gears. Let's move from the machine to the human side of this.
Okay.
Despite this incredible tech becoming available, what is the observed impact on the actual labor market today? I mean, we're almost 3 years after generative AI went mainstream. Are the displacement headlines matching reality on the ground?
Well, the structural potential is, frankly, it's terrifying. The analysis shows that over 30% of all workers could see at least half, that's 50% of their work tasks, exposed to disruption by Gen AI.
That's a huge number.
It's massive. However, and this is the important part, if we look at the economy-wide data on occupational mix, the actual pace of change, the shifts in job titles since late 2022, it's not dramatically different from past periods of tech integration.
Like the internet boom.
Exactly, like the large-scale adoption of the internet.
So the high exposure hasn't translated into this clear, immediate displacement surge among people who are currently employed?
That's the nuance we really have to grasp here. Latent risk versus realized displacement. We even looked at the profile of newly unemployed workers.
And what did that show?
They are, on average, in occupations where, say, 25% to 35% of tasks could be done by generative AI. But we are not seeing a clear, accelerating upward trend in job displacement that we can definitively attribute to AI, not yet.
So the disruption it's latent. It's waiting for mass enterprise integration, but it hasn't universally materialized as mass layoffs.
That's the state of play right now.
And what's fascinating here, too, is the disruption profile itself.
Yeah.
It kind of runs counter to historical trends, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Generative AI is uniquely poised to disrupt cognitive and non-routine tasks. Historically, automation was all about routine, manual labor, blue-collar work.
Right. The factory floor.
The factory floor. Now, the impact is squarely hitting middle to higher paid white-collar professions.
Yeah.
Paralegals, copywriters, software coders, administrative specialists.
And this leads us directly to the data that came out on gender disparity.
Yes, and it's stark. Women face higher exposure and automation risk. Roughly 36% of female workers are in roles where Gen AI could achieve 50% time savings on tasks.
And for men.
It's 25%. And this is because women are overrepresented in those precise administrative and knowledge-based white-collar roles that rely so heavily on the cognitive, non-routine tasks that AI is getting really good at.
Okay, this brings us to a really critical policy question that the sources highlight. Why are companies incentivized to choose automation using that reliable agentic RAG system we just talked about over upskilling their human workforce and, achieving augmentation?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the answer is, well, it's frustratingly simple.
Yeah.
The U.S. tax code.
Really?
Really. Our sources point to a fundamental fiscal bias that actively, structurally favors investment in physical capital new servers, AI systems, software licenses over investment in human capital.
Which is employee retraining, upskilling, education.
Exactly.
We literally have a structural preference for machines written right into our economic rules.
What does that mean in practice for a company that's trying to do the right thing and reskill its employees? It means they get penalized. It's that simple. When a company buys a server for, say, $100,000 to run Agentic RAG, they can often expense or depreciate that entire cost very quickly. But if they spend that same $100,000 retraining 10 employees, the tax code treats that investment very, very differently. The restrictive $5,250 benefit cap on non-taxable tuition assistance is probably the most glaring example.
Okay, what's the significance of that specific number, $5,250 today?
It's obsolete. That figure was set decades ago. It hasn't kept pace at all with the cost of specialized university-level or professional certifications you need for AI literacy.
I can see that. I mean, comprehensive AI boot camps or certifications can cost, what, $10,000, $15,000?
Easily. Upwards of that. So once a company goes over that $5,250 limit per employee, the rest of that tuition assistance becomes taxable income for the worker.
So it creates a massive disincentive. A huge disincentive for companies to fund these large-scale, transformative workforce adaptation programs. This fiscal asymmetry, it structurally accelerates the decision to automate over the decision to augment your people.
That is just a staggering realization that the system itself is structurally pushing the outcome toward displacement, regardless of what the latent risk data says.
It is.
Now, let's pivot hard to the legal sphere. The courts are basically defining the rules for both what goes into AI copyright and what comes out data privacy. What's so fascinating here is how unsettled the law is, particularly around fair use.
The law is evolving in real time, and it's all highly fact-specific. We've got these key generative AI decisions out of the Northern District of California, Bart's v. Anthropic and Cudray v. Meta.
Right.
And in both of those cases, the judges agreed that using copyrighted works strictly to train the massive language models is highly transformative. That finding tends to tilt the first statutory factor of fair use heavily in favor of the AI developers.
But the judges seem to disagree pretty strongly on what is arguably the most crucial factor, market harm. Correct. Factor 4. The effect of the use upon the potential market is generally seen as the single most important element. And while the courts agree the plaintiff has to show concrete, non-speculative market harm, they strongly disagree on whether market dilution should be considered a legally cognizable harm.
Okay, if I'm hearing this right, market dilution means the AI is competing with the original work, even if the AI's output isn't a direct copy. Why is that distinction so important?
It's the difference between direct copying and functional competition. Plaintiffs argue that even if the AI synthesizes a brand new output, that output still competes directly with their original material, diluting their market value.
And some judges buy that argument and some don't.
Exactly. Judges who reject it usually argue that if the output isn't substantially similar, then the competition is just non-infringing. But the outcomes are not uniform at all. If you contrast these LLM cases with Thomson Reuters v. RSS,
The legal AI tool.
right, that tool lost its fair use defense because the court found its use of copyrighted headnotes was not transformative. It was just a direct market substitute. So the specific use case matters immensely.
And there was a very clear boundary set on how the data was acquired in the first place.
That's a firm line in the sand. In Bart's v. Anthropic, the court placed dispositive weight on the source of acquisition. It rejected the fair use defense entirely if the training data was illegally acquired or pirated.
So that's a huge signal to developers.
It's a massive signal. Lawful data acquisition is paramount if you want to have a successful defense.
Okay, now let's talk about the massive legal fallout from the New York Times v. OpenAI. This case seems to have jumped from just a copyright dispute to defining global data liability almost overnight.
It really did. The case fundamentally shifted the focus from the risk of the input data to the liability of the output data. A magistrate judge issued a preservation order in May of 2025.
And what did that order do?
It mandated that OpenAI retain all ChatGPT conversation logs, prompts, and responses on a going-forward basis.
And how many users did that order affect? And why is that such a landmark moment for litigation?
It immediately affected over 400 million users globally. All tiers, all subscriptions. This is a watershed moment for e-discovery, electronic discovery in litigation.
Because it redefines the data itself.
It does. It mandates that enterprises must treat all AI conversational data not as these ephemeral chats, but as potentially discoverable evidence in future lawsuits. For legal teams trying to scale e-discovery to index, review, and produce millions of unique conversation logs from 400 million users, it creates an unimaginable new compliance burden.
I can't even imagine. Did OpenAI challenge this? I mean, citing global privacy rules like GDPR?
Absolutely. They argued the order conflicted with user privacy expectations and international regulations, but the court affirmed the order.
On what grounds?
They noted the company's own terms of use allowed for preservation when it's required for legal compliance. The decision just underscores that vendor privacy promises are secondary to court-mandated discovery obligations. It adds a whole other layer of risk management complexity for corporate AI users.
Wow. Okay, so now that we've covered the technical frontier, the labor crisis, and the legal battlegrounds, let's look at how the world is trying to govern this technology. We're seeing a massive regulatory divergence, most notably between the EU and the US.
We really are. The EU AI Act is establishing the unified high-bar global standard. It operates on a comprehensive risk-based system. Any systems deemed to pose unacceptable risk are just outright prohibited.
Can you give us a quick example? What does unacceptable risk actually mean in practice? What kind of system is banned?
It targets practices that fundamentally undermine civil rights or, manipulate large groups of people. So this includes things like predictive social scoring by public authorities,
Okay.
real-time remote biometric identification in public spaces, and systems designed for cognitive behavioral manipulation. That is, using subliminal techniques or exploiting vulnerabilities to cause real detrimental harm to a person's behavior.
And for generative AI specifically, like, The systems using that Agentic RAG we talked about, what are the transparency requirements under the EU Act?
They have to adhere to three key transparency rules. First, they have to disclose that the content was AI generated. Simple enough.
Hmm.
Second, they have to design the models to prevent the generation of illegal content. And third, and this is the most globally significant provision provider, must publish sufficiently detailed summaries of the copyrighted data used for training.
That's a big one. So now contrast that high-bar, unified approach with the fragmented U.S. stance.
The U.S. approach it's characterized by fragmented regulation and pretty aggressive federal preemption efforts. The sources describe a draft executive order aiming to eliminate state law obstruction of national AI policy.
So the federal government is taking an antagonistic stance toward the states.
It is, because it fears a patchwork of state-level laws will stifle innovation and create, huge compliance costs for national companies.
And how is the federal government signaling that antagonism?
The executive order directs federal agencies, specifically the DOJ Litigation Task Force and the Commerce Department, to sue or withhold funds from states that pass laws they deem burdensome to AI innovation.
And they name names.
They explicitly targeted the Colorado AI Act for its reporting requirements, and it also went after state laws that had DEI provisions. The result is just high legal uncertainty and constantly shifting compliance burdens for any company operating across state lines.
Finally, before we wrap up, we need to address the deep ethical note here surrounding training data consent, which really underpins the integrity of all these models.
Right. This raises a really important question about the foundation of many, many current LLMs. These models are trained on massive amounts of web data that was often scraped without explicit user consent.
Or with consent that's buried deep in some terms and conditions nobody reads.
Exactly.
And where does that lack of consent become particularly problematic, moving beyond just basic copyright and into personal data?
The ethical concerns are highest when you have sensitive personal data like social media data that contain, say, neurodiversity labels, political affiliations, or self-reported health information that's just vacuumed up and used for purposes like digital phenotyping.
When AI is trained to classify or predict sensitive things about people without them knowing.
Without their explicit informed consent, yes, it creates major ethical dilemmas. And the consensus forming in research ethics is clear. IRB approval doesn't automatically equal an ethical study. Explicit informed consent and community-based participatory design are being strongly advocated for, especially with health-related AI models, to prevent this kind of exploitation.
So to synthesize this entire landscape for you, AI is growing more specialized, more auditable, and more reliable through Agentic RAG.
But at the same time,
It's being structurally steered toward automation by this outdated, punitive fiscal policy, even though the immediate job displacement data remains complex.
and then on top of all that, the legal and ethical boundaries are being defined by these massive court-mandated data preservation orders and these volatile, fact-specific copyright rulings.
That's the trilemma facing every executive and policymaker right now. It's a moment defined by high technical capability coupled with just systemic policy and legal risk.
It really is.
And that leads us to our final thought for you, the learner. Given that the EU AI Act mandates publishing summaries of copyrighted training data giving plaintiffs, detailed insight into what went into the model, and given that U.S. copyright plaintiffs need strong evidence of market harm to succeed in court, how might this mandatory global transparency policy unintentionally arm U.S. plaintiffs and decisively shift the center of gravity in U.S. fair use litigation?
The fascinating question.
It forces the global regulatory loop to feed right back into local court battles, and that's a really interesting policy conflict to consider.